Purposes, Mr. Roy seek recognition.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Respectfully, to my colleague Ms. Dean about the comment about faux arguments, I won't rehash the argument that I made on the Bishop Amendment. I mean, obviously it failed, but I don't believe it's a faux argument to be talking about the power of government being used to target parents. And that's very specifically what's happening. It's by definition in the whistleblower documentation and in what we know is reported about Mr. Smith. And I would just ask my Democratic colleagues to talk to Mr. Smith. Have Mr. Smith come in and then tell him that his argument is faux. Say that what happened to him or having the National School Board Association coordinate with the White House and the FBI to have a tag going after parents and then say the reason for that is a guy like Mr. Smith going to a school board. Tell him that that's a faux argument on behalf of him to say we're concerned about tracking of parents when his daughter was raped in a bathroom. I'd just like to see the look on his face when my Democratic colleagues say that it is a faux argument in defense of his liberties. I would argue on the issue at hand, I'm sympathetic to Mr. Gates's point. I'm probably persuaded along the lines of my colleague from North Carolina's point about my friend from Florida's making very clear the politicized nature of this bill, right? I mean, that's the purpose of it. It's putting a slant in the code. It's a targeting very specifically without a full context of the blindfolds of justice that we know are supposed to be rooted in our justice system, going after and looking at criminal activity, regardless of why that criminal activity is occurring. The motives are what you use to go kind of figure out and track it, but the criminal activity is criminal activity. It's violence, or it's murder, or it's whatever's happening. And you can go root it out, and our law enforcement officials, and many of us in this room have served in some capacity in prosecution or attorneys general offices or whatever. Our law enforcement community is fully empowered right now to go after whoever they want to go after if they're bad guys. They're in the state authorities and local authorities and federal authorities. They're fully empowered to go after bad guys. So if there's bad guys, go after them. But no, we know what this is about. This is a political piece of legislation. That's what it is. And everybody objectively observing it knows it's a political piece of legislation. So we say, oh, well, BLM, the chairman said, don't say anything negative about BLM. These are peaceful protests, he said. You look at any data, we had 140 cities in 2020 with BLM protests at the root of them of $2 billion of damage, $2 billion with a B, $billion of damage. Stories about the BLM co-founder, Patrice Cullors, said in a Surface video from 2015 that she and her fellow organizers are trained Marxists, quote unquote. She was the protege of Eric Mann, the Weather Underground domestic terror organization, spent years absorbing the Marxist-Lenin ideology that shaped her worldview. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Quote, we are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. I could go on and on. Look, my friend from Florida is simply making the point that, if you're going to have a politicized piece of language that's focusing on a particular group, he's just simply saying, well, let's just make clear and let's focus on these other groups, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to say no. If it's just objective, then what are you worried about? If BLM's not doing anything, then what are you worried about? Just put them in there, and if it's peaceful protest, there's no concern because the power of the FBI, apparently, according to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is nothing to be worried about. So just put BLM in there and say, okay, go on about your day, peaceful protesters. But you don't want to do that. And that's the plain reality of the situation, and so I will be supporting my friend from Florida's amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? If not, the question occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler.
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren.
Your ability to schedule.
No.
Hire a scheduler until
Ms.
we're able to
Lofgren
do
votes
that,
no.
but
Ms. Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen.
role that she can do scheduling
No.
correctly, then we'll move her
Mr.
into that
Cohen
role.
votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
No.
Say yes.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no.
Thank you.
Mr. Deutsch.
Yes, she is very helpful.
Ms. Bass.
Bass votes no.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Cicilline. Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell.
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu.
No.
Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal.
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Stimmings.
No.
Ms. Stimmings votes no. Mr. Correa.
Correa votes no.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon.